It was still dark when I heard that knock. At first, I thought I imagined it, just the wind tapping against the wood. But then it came again. 3 soft knocks. Slow, hesitant, almost scared. I grabbed my lantern and walked toward the door. The old boards creaked beneath my boots, and for some reason, my chest felt heavy, like the air itself was warning me to stop. When I opened that door, I froze. There she was, a little girl, no older than 7, standing barefoot on the porch. Her feet were cut, her dress torn, and her face smeared with dirt and dried tears. The cold morning air bit at her skin, but she didn't even shiver. She just looked up at me with wide, terrified eyes, eyes that didn't belong to a child. Her lips trembled, and then she said the words that stopped my heart. "They beat my mama," she whispered, her voice cracking. "She's dying." For a moment, I couldn't move. Couldn't think. I'd lived out here alone for years. Just me, the cattle, and the sound of wind through the pines. I thought I'd left the chaos of the world behind. But standing there, staring at that broken little girl, I felt something I hadn't felt in a long time. Fear and anger. I wanted to ask her what happened, who hurt her, where her mama was, but one look at her face told me I didn't have time. Her hands were shaking. Her voice barely a whisper. She was running out of strength. So I knelt down, trying to sound calm, even though my heart was pounding out of my chest. "Where is she, sweetheart?" I asked. She lifted her tiny arm and pointed toward the dark line of trees behind the hills. "Over there," she said. "In the woods." And that's when I realized my life was never going to be the same again. When a child cries like that, you don't think, you just move. I grabbed my coat from the hook by the door and bent down to her level. Hey, it's all right," I said softly, even though I knew it wasn't. "What's your name, sweetheart?" She wiped her nose with the back of her hand and whispered, "Clara." Her voice was so small, it almost broke me. She was trembling so hard I could feel it from where I stood. Every breath came out like she was fighting not to collapse. "All right, Clara," I said, trying to sound steady. "We're going to your mama, okay? You just show me where." She nodded fast, tears spilling down her dirty cheeks. Then, without another word, she turned and pointed toward the woods, dark, cold, and thick with frost. I didn't ask another question. I didn't have to. The way she said, "they," told me enough. Whoever did this wasn't far. I lifted her into my arms. She weighed almost nothing, and started running down the path she pointed to. The cold air burned my lungs, but I didn't care. My boots hit the frozen ground in heavy, desperate thuds. The forest was silent. No birds. No wind. Just Clara's quiet sobs against my shoulder. She tried to speak through her tears, small, broken sentences that didn't make sense. "They came last night. Mama told me to hide. She screamed. They kept hitting her." Every word felt like a knife twisting deeper into my chest. I wanted to tell her it would be all right, but I didn't know if that was true. Something about the way she spoke, the way her voice faded at the word "dying," made my stomach twist. The trees started to thin out, and up ahead I saw smoke, faint, rising from a crooked chimney. "That's her. That's Mama," Clara whispered, her hand shaking as she pointed. And in that moment, I felt it, the cold realization that maybe we were too late. Because the kind of beating she described doesn't leave much life behind. By the time we reached that shack, I prayed we weren't too late. Nothing, and I mean nothing, prepares you for the sight of real cruelty. When I stepped into that shack, it felt like walking straight into someone's nightmare. The place was dark, cold, and smelled like blood and smoke. The floor was covered in dust, one window broken, and an old chair lying on its side, like someone had been thrown against it. And then I saw her, lying on the floor, barely moving. Her face was swollen, her skin covered in bruises. She looked like she'd been through hell and somehow was still breathing. Clara screamed and ran to her. "Mama! Mama, wake up!" The sound of that little girl's cry hit me harder than anything ever could. I rushed over, dropped to my knees, and checked the woman's pulse. It was there, but weak. Real weak. Her chest barely moved. Her lips trembled like she wanted to speak but couldn't. And in that moment, something inside me snapped. Whoever did this didn't just want to hurt her, they wanted her gone. I could see muddy footprints near the door. Heavy ones. More than one man. And the air still smelled like whiskey and sweat. I looked at Clara. She was holding her mama's hand, shaking all over, begging her to wake up. Her mother opened her eyes just a little and whispered, "Clara, run." That broke me. I wasn't a soft man. I'd lived alone for years. Worked hard. Spoke little. But right then, seeing that woman, seeing that little girl, something inside me changed. I felt anger. Real anger. But not the kind that makes you lose control. The kind that makes you do what needs to be done. I pulled the torn blanket off the floor, wrapped it around the woman, and lifted her into my arms. She was light as a feather. Too light. Clara ran beside me, crying, her tiny feet stumbling over the dirt. The cold air hit us as soon as I stepped outside, but I didn't stop. Not once. Not even when my arms went numb from her weight. And right there, walking through that frozen morning, I made a promise. I didn't know who hurt her, but I swore, before God, I'd find out. I'd fixed horses with broken legs before, but this was different. When I carried her inside my house and laid her on the bed, I could see how bad it was. Her face was bruised, her ribs swollen, and blood had dried along her hairline. I didn't even know her name yet, but I knew she didn't deserve this. Clara sat beside her mother, holding her hand tight, whispering stories like maybe her voice could pull her back. "Mama, it's okay. The nice man's helping you," she said, her voice trembling. It broke my heart just hearing her try to sound brave. I grabbed a basin of warm water, some clean cloth, and started cleaning the wounds. My hands were rough, shaking, and for a second, I was scared I'd hurt her more. But she didn't flinch. Not once. She was too far gone in pain to even react. I kept working. Wiping blood, wrapping cuts, whispering prayers I hadn't said in years. The whole house was quiet except for Clara's soft sniffles and the sound of the wind outside. Hours passed. The fire burned low. And slowly, I saw her breathing start to steady. Her color came back. Just a little. Enough to make me hope. When Clara finally drifted off to sleep beside her mother, I just sat there in the dark, elbows on my knees, staring at the floor. I'd lived alone for so long, I'd forgotten what it felt like to care for someone. To actually worry about whether they'd see morning. And as I sat there, my eyes caught something near the torn hem of her dress, a small piece of cloth. It looked out of place. Dark blue, rough texture, with a stitched emblem I knew too well. I held it up to the light, and my stomach turned. It was from a ranch jacket, the same kind worn by the men I used to work with, the same ones who thought they owned this town. And that's when I realized, the devil I was hiding from was right here in my own town. Evil doesn't disappear just because you close your door. For a while, things were calm. Marin was healing. Clara was laughing again. And for the first time in years, my house didn't feel empty anymore. But deep down, I knew peace like that never lasts. Not when bad men still walk free. Word started spreading fast. People in town were whispering, saying I was hiding a woman and her kid. Some said I was doing the right thing. Others said I was asking for trouble. And soon, the wrong people heard it. It was early morning when I heard the sound. Horses. More than one. That steady, heavy thump of hooves hitting frozen dirt. I stepped outside, and there they were, 4 men riding toward my gate. Dust in the air. Hat brims low. I recognized 2 of them the second I saw their faces. Men I used to work with. The kind that think a gun makes them powerful. They stopped right in front of my fence, smirking like they owned the place. One of them leaned forward on his saddle and said, well, big man's gone soft. Heard you got a lady and her brat hidin' in there. Hand 'em over, Sam." I just stared at him. Didn't blink. Didn't move. Then I said quietly, "You cross this fence. You don't leave it." The smile on his face vanished. He could tell I wasn't bluffing. They all could. For a long moment, no one spoke. Just the wind. The creak of leather. Even the horses stood still, like they could feel the tension. Finally, the man spat on the ground and tugged his reins. "This ain't over," he said. You'll regret this." They turned and rode off, kicking up a cloud of dust behind them. I stood there until they disappeared down the road. My jaw was tight. My hands were still shaking. They left that day. But in my gut, I knew it wasn't over. Not even close. Days passed, and for the first time in years, my house felt alive. The silence I'd lived with for so long was gone. Now there was laughter, soft voices, and the sound of footsteps that weren't just mine. Maren was getting stronger. She'd started walking around the house, helping where she could, folding blankets, cooking small meals, humming old songs under her breath. And every time I passed by, she'd give a quiet smile, the kind that said, "Thank you," without saying a word. Clara was different too. The fear in her eyes had faded. Now she ran around the yard, chasing chickens, giggling when they flapped their wings and scattered. Sometimes she'd stop and look at me, grinning from ear to ear, and yell, "Come on, Mr. Samuel. You're too slow." I'd laugh, really laugh, for the first time in a long time. I'd forgotten what that even felt like. We started falling into a rhythm. Maren cooked warm meals that made the whole place smell like home. Clara followed me to the barn, learning how to feed the animals and collect eggs. And for a little while, everything just felt right. But still, I couldn't shake the habit. Every night before bed, I checked the locks, made sure the rifle was loaded, and kept it leaning against the wall, right beside the door. Because deep down, I knew peace in this world doesn't last long. It never does. And just when I thought peace had finally found us, it was ripped away again. They always come back. Bullies. Cowards. Devils. They never quit the first time. It was late, the kind of quiet night where even the crickets stopped singing. I was sitting by the fire, half asleep, when I heard Clara scream, "Mr. Samuel! Outside!" I jumped up, grabbed my rifle, and ran to the door. She was standing in the hallway, shaking, pointing toward the window. "I saw someone," she cried. "There were shadows, by the barn." I stepped out into the cold night air, my heart pounding. The yard was empty, but the horses were restless, snorting, kicking at the ground. I walked around the fence, lantern in one hand, rifle in the other. That's when I saw it. Fresh hoof prints. Deep ones. They led from the woods right up to my property line, and then back out again. Whoever was out there had been watching us. I came back inside, trying to stay calm, but Maren saw it in my face. "What is it?" she asked. Her voice was shaking. I didn't want to tell her. But I didn't have to, she already knew. She sat down slowly and said, "Those men, they were part of a gang. They used to work for your old boss." I froze. My old boss? The man who ran half the land around here? She nodded. "They came after me because I refused to work for them." Her voice cracked. "They think women like me are theirs to use. When I said no, they beat me. I ran. That's when Clara found you." My hands tightened around the rifle. So it wasn't random. It wasn't a mistake. They knew exactly who she was, and now they knew where she was. I looked at Maren. I looked at Clara, still crying softly in the corner. And right then, I made up my mind. "So that night," I whispered to myself, loading each bullet with a steady hand, "I made a decision. They were coming for us. But this time, I'd be ready." At sunrise, they came. 4 men on horses, thinking they'd finish what they started. I'd been up all night, waiting. The rifle was loaded. The fence gate was locked. And I'd already made peace with whatever had to happen next. The first rays of light hit the hills just as they rode in, slow, confident, like they owned the ground beneath them. Dust rose around their horses. The cold morning air carried their laughter, ugly, cruel. They stopped at my gate. I could see it in their faces. They weren't here to talk. One of them shouted, "You really think you can stand against us, old man? Hand them over before you get yourself killed." I didn't move. Didn't blink. Just stood there, calm and steady, with a rifle in my hands. Maren and Clara were inside, watching from the window. I could feel their fear behind me. But I wasn't afraid. Not anymore. The lead man smirked. "You always were stubborn, Harrow. Guess we'll do this the hard way. He reached for his gun. And that's when I fired. The shot hit the dirt right in front of his horse, loud enough to shake the trees. The animal reared up, screaming, and the man almost fell off his saddle. "Next one," I said, my voice shaking with rage, "won't hit the ground." Silence. You could hear the wind stop. The other men looked at each other, nervous, unsure. They saw it in my eyes. I wasn't bluffing. The fire, the fury, the promise, it was all there. Then, from down the road, came another sound, hooves again, but faster this time. The sheriff. He'd heard the shot. He came riding hard, shouting, "Drop your guns! All of you!" The men hesitated. One by one, they let their hands fall. And just like that, the fight was over before it began. The sheriff arrested them right there on the road. Cuffed them, cursed them, and dragged them off like the trash they were. As the dust settled, I lowered my rifle. My arms were heavy. My chest felt tight. Clara ran out and hugged my leg, crying. Marin followed, her eyes full of tears and relief. And standing there, with the morning sun shining over us, I realized something. This wasn't just about saving them. It was about saving myself. Funny thing, sometimes you think you're the rescuer. But it's you who gets saved. Months passed. The snow melted. The grass turned green again. And the ranch, it didn't feel empty anymore. Clara filled every corner of that house with laughter. Every morning, she'd run around the yard, chasing chickens, shouting my name like I was some kind of hero. Marin would watch from the porch, smiling softly, stronger now, calmer, at peace. She'd started helping me around the ranch. Fixing fences, cooking meals, even arguing with me about how much sugar belonged in coffee. It was simple. It was ordinary. And somehow, it was everything I never knew I needed. There were no more gunshots. No more fear. Just life. Real, quiet, honest life. Sometimes, I'd sit out by the barn and think about that night. About the little girl standing barefoot at my door. If I hadn't opened it, if I'd just turned away, I don't even want to imagine what would have happened. That one knock changed everything. It gave me purpose again. It gave me family. And it reminded me that even the hardest hearts can still heal. One morning, as the sun came up, we all stood together, me, Marin, and Clara, watching the light spread across the fields. Clara held my hand on one side, Marin held the other. And for the first time in a long time, I felt peace. Real peace. I looked at them both and smiled. Because that knock didn't just save their lives. It saved mine too.